To build on Senator Whitehouse's points about monopoly power overpricing and also on market failure. I know in prior questions we addressed the question of compounding, instances where it's succeeded in breaking that market or monopoly power, instances where it hasn't. Is there anything Congress can do to create more of the former and less of the latter, to make compounding for these often very small batch, limited demand drugs available through compounding pharmacists all around the country?
It's an interesting question. We could look into that and get back to you. And again, this is a new development that we responded to quickly and aggressively. Typically, we wouldn't use compounders for this, although they play a very valuable role. And we need to look and see whether this is an interim solution or something that, has more potential. But we're still looking into all that.
And you basically, if you can, you want the FDA to approve these drugs because the compounding does not go through the same rigorous testing that the FDA puts the generic companies through. So it's at best a second best solution, but it is a solution in an emergency.
And I would just say that it's not a solution for everyone. So if we take the pyrimethamine or Daraprim example, the babies that I treat, we still have to get a powder or a tablet into a liquid formulation. We don't know what the stability is with this new imiprimus, I think it is, compounded material. We do know what it is, and we know how long it's stable with the Daraprim product. So we can't simply just swap out what we're adding the liquid to make it a liquid formulation in the case of treating little babies. So it can be more complex.
Okay. Dr. Fox, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I would just, thank you, I would add that, compounding is not perfect. Patients have been harmed by poorly compounded drugs, but it also serves a very important option for some patients. So it's definitely a balance, and I definitely echo my colleague.
And I asked about Congress, and what about FDA? Is there anything that FDA could do internally to, say, expedite the use of compounding pharmacies in these kind of situations where you might have market failure?
Again, it could, but I think it's just better to have a generic drug in there. So what I talk about is expedited review and putting that at the top of the queue for the FDA when there is no competition. And that, I think, would be better and really gives you those clinical safeguards that you would like to have.
Well, I'm glad you raised it, because I wanted to return to the point you had made earlier about expedited review. What could Congress, or the FDA for that matter, do to accomplish what you're describing, to expedite the time for approval of these generic drugs, which have often been on the market for a long time and have very limited demand, so they might not have the same kind of priority at companies, but if the regulatory process were simpler, it might move along faster?
So essentially there is a queuing problem, and essentially if the FDA is essentially given that authority or that responsibility to say there is no competition for this drug, we're going to put you at the top of the list to do the expedited review, then we would have competition in 6 months, but we would have competition, which was better than 2.5 years, which would probably be today.
So that's the scale difference you're looking at then, 6 months versus, say, 30 months?
Correct.
Pretty big difference. I'd also like to touch on the point of pricing. One common claim you hear about pricing of drugs is the R&D costs that are built into them. I know there's some dispute about how much the R&D cost depends. There's a front page story in the Wall Street Journal about it today. Some companies have been acquiring the rights to drugs. Is there an economic difference between, say, a big pharmaceutical company spending $100 million to develop a new drug and then those costs being discounted into the price they're going to charge versus a big pharmaceutical company buying a company at $100 million price because that's the net present value they expect from that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think obviously, you want the R&D costs to be part of it, but I think from our perspective, in this we get to transparency and so forth, we don't care so much about the inputs. Everybody has a great reason why they should be able to charge whatever they want in the drug. What changes things, you say, that's great. Now we have a competitor, and whichever one of you gives us the best prices on the formula or the other one's out. That's how you get prices down, and then we find that to be much more clarifying and effective than trying to kind of figure out the cost of certain inputs and then adding this or adding that, because it's just, I just don't think it would work. I mean, if there's a competitor in the market and a drug that is doing the exact same thing, has a risk of not being on the formulary, we don't say, here's how much to pay. We say whoever gives in the best offer wins, the other one loses. That's how to get really deep discounts.
So there's a new system, we're talking about generics, but in the brand side, there's the idea, normally Pfizer does the research themselves and as the R&D, but there are now companies out there that just buy companies that are almost ready or have gotten all through the FDA process. They buy the company, and then they jack up the price there. So that's it. On the brand side, there's something that you're going to have to pay attention to in that regard as well, because they're doing the same thing, and they're essentially the hedge funds of the brand side.
Okay, my time has expired, but I want to thank the chairman and the ranking for calling this very important hearing.
Thank you. Senator